Tonight's sermon is entitled Impacting Factors. Impacting Factors. I just had this experience today. It's kind of been a follow-up for a day or so. The other day I cleaned our chicken coop. Thank you very much. Chickens make eggs, but they also make other stuff, and so every once in a while you want to clean out the chicken coop. It's more aromatic with the wood chips and whatnot, and so Sandy was at work, and so I was on my own, but I got her done. The problem was in the process, one of the black chickens flew up around me and out the door it went. And so I'm sitting here, and I'm inside the coop, and I've got the wheelbarrow full of you-know-what, and then there's that chicken, and it's walking around, and I thought, it seems calm. I think it'll come back in once we get going, but as I watched it, it began to kind of run here and there, and before long it ran over by the round bales, and I thought, it's going to nest in there for a while. But by the time I saw, the last I saw, it was in the woods, and it was looked like up towards the hill, towards the neighbor's dogs. And so I thought, we got to write that one off. And so when Sandy came home, we kind of had a memorial moment, and a moment of silence, and realized, and we prayed this prayer: please don't let it be one of the chickens that lays a lot of eggs. Because we have some that don't do anything, they just hang out. But so anyway, it's out, and so Louise was letting her dog out this morning, and then later on she was saying, oh, that black chicken's running around. So the black chicken is still around, and so I've got this little pole shed, and we found out it was hanging out in there, and so I thought I would go and kind of herd it towards the chicken coop, and so I opened the chicken coop door, and I even opened the window so they could talk to her, like, come on in, come back, And so I started to herd her that way, and before long she started to go kind of around me, and so I ran as fast as I could on ice, Oh, you. And it flew over and back in the woods. Now it's back when we left it was back in the old shed. But the point I want to make is, isn't it interesting how fear in that bird, which is for survival, is actually going to impact that bird probably for death, isn't it? In other words, I'm trying to help that bird back into its home, back into the warmth, back into the food, back into the water, back into her little buddies, and she's fighting me all the way. How many of you feel that you have tried to help some Christian or some unchristian get further with Christ or come to know Christ, and it's almost like that? You're sharing this truth with them. You've got the greatest gift of all to share with them, and they seem to fight you or run away like the chicken does. And you roll your eyes and you think, what's going on? I'm giving you the greatest promise you could ever have, the greatest gift you could ever receive, and yet you're fighting me to stay in the dysfunction, and you're fighting me to stay in the world that's not working because of fear. Oftentimes it's fear. Now, we can think about our lives. I'm not judging them. How many of you had somebody come and talk to you about Jesus Christ a few times, and you somehow ran away because of fear? How many of us wonder if Christ sometimes looks at us and says, what is going on? I'm trying to send this person to speak into your life, and yet you run away with fear. And so we realize that this chicken is kind of an analogy for a lot of us, for our lives, or for who we are. But this whole idea of fear and this whole idea of impacting factors is a big deal. Because in life there are many factors that influence who we are. How you were raised, where you were raised, all these different things impact who we are. And so before long you realize that in some form or fashion we're the sum of many factors that took place in our life. And we could talk about a lot of different things, but tonight I want to spend more time talking about the fear factor. Isn't it? I'm going to make her, by golly. The fear factor. Now, fear oftentimes, I think, for somebody that's going to come to know Christ or to expand or to surrender yourself more with Christ, includes surrendering, and can include finances. All churches want is money, and then giving up control. Surrendering to Christ, saying, you know what, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. How you want me to live, I'll live. All these different things. I'll go to church even twice a week if that's what you call me to do. But it's a surrendering that takes place. And for a lot of us, we could say, well, it's no big deal, or I'm just going to choose not to. But if you'll begin to tear apart that choose not to and figure out what's really going on, oftentimes there's some level of fear. And that fear might have started back in the day when somebody stepped on your toes, or you've gone through this bad experience with the church before and never again, and all these different things. But it doesn't matter. The point is there's a factor that is precipitating our moving forward with Christ, and that's the issue we're talking about, is factors. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not talking about math factors. I don't know much about that. I skipped on those days or wasn't paying attention. But this whole idea that impacting factors makes a difference in our life. Life is full of impacting factors, and oftentimes, again, they're mostly fear-related. Now, some people will use fear to manipulate us or to get what they want. I mean, if anyone's been paying attention to the politicians in the last few months, they speak about what they can do, but oftentimes they tell you what the other person can't do, won't do, or will do to you. And so before long, it casts some doubt in your mind, and you start to say, I don't know if that candidate's the one for me. But if you spend more time on that, that doubt oftentimes turns to fear. What if I do vote for that person and they do cancel out Social Security? I don't think I'll probably ever get it the way it's looking, but some of you are getting it. And so, because of your age, they don't worry about elderly people. They don't worry about the color of the skin on this person. They won't look out for you and all these different things. And before long, they've got us feared into voting for them because we're afraid something else won't or will happen. And so sometimes fear can be a manipulation. How many of you think Christ, why he says to not fear him is because there's a reverence that goes towards him and there's a truth that comes out of him. Meanwhile, Satan himself wants to use fear all the time to limit who we are. How many of you have ever been captive by fear? Heavy burdens we sang about tonight. You carry a load because of things that have happened to you in life. Whether it was right or wrong, or whether you had any control of it or not. I mean, I made lots of stupid mistakes in my life that have added to fear in my life, but many people had things cast upon them, placed into their lives that they didn't ask for. Fear can be a factor. The definition of factor I looked up, it said, something that actively contributes to a result. Kind of a common sense thing. Something that can actively contribute to a result is a factor. So, if you're thinking about if you're thinking about buying a new car, you think of some different factors. What's the gas prices? What's the gas mileage? How much would insurance be? And all these different things. You start to look at all these different factors when you come up to make a decision. And so we have to keep in mind that factors are something that actively contributes to a result. It can be a good result. It can be a bad result. If you're afraid of snakes, anybody? All right, so if I say I'm going to give you an all-expense-paid trip to the middle of the Everglades, some of you might say, I just as soon pass on that. I don't like snakes. There's a factor I've got to place into this decision. I'm going to bypass the Everglades, please, and maybe drop me off, downtown Miami. And so this whole point is that factors in our life and factors that are placed upon us can limit our walk with Christ or even can improve it depending on what that fear is. That fear of reverence for God. I appreciate Francie tonight was talking about having reverence for God and what he wants in our life. Having reverence for Christ and his desires of how we should live. That is a motivating fear. In other words, I'm saying because I want to live like him and I realize, remember the warning signs we talked about last week? That I'm going to make some choices and changes, and that's a motivating factor. So fear can be a positive thing. It can also be oftentimes a negative thing. Now, I looked up different things about fear. Here, it's the top 10 things they say are fearful things. Number 10 is flying. Anyone afraid of flying? Okay, a couple people raise their hands. Dogs. I am afraid of dogs. If I had $100 for every time I went to a farm to unload lumber in the lumberyard business, and this dog would come up, and they'd say, oh, don't worry about him, he doesn't bite. 15 minutes later, here's the discussion. I've never seen him do that before. He's never bit anyone before. Yeah, I'd have a few $100, believe me. Dogs, when I come into a yard, I'll be honest, I look for food bowls, I look for tracks, I look for bones in the yard, I look to see if it looks like a dog's hanging out. Spiders. Woo. Rats or mice? Anyone? Now we've let 20 rats go tonight to see if you guys, anyone know. I took the offering before I shared this, so I want to make sure before you're gone. Death. Death is number 6 on the list. People ponder that. I think for those of us that believe in Jesus Christ and know that our future is secure, death is less fearful. But for those that don't, I think, especially as they get closer to death, oftentimes you'll see a fear rise up. Blood, heights, darkness, thunderstorms, and the number 1 was snakes. Now on that list, it's kind of like things we can come in contact with, things that we might experience as we live. There's another top 10 list, and this one I appreciated more because I think it fits with more of the fears that we actually face. The 10th one was fear of inadequacy, feeling less than. A lot of these are tied very close together, but yet they still have their own purpose. Fear of getting hurt, physically. How many of you know it's more emotionally? I've worked with abused people, and they say I would rather be hit than mentally abused. I would rather be hit because that bruise goes away versus the verbal attacks that stick in my heart and wound. Fear of something bad happening. How many of you are always walking around saying, oh, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? Well, yeah, that's just the beginning. You wait till by noon. Right? Oh my gosh, yes, there are people that have that. Something bad's going to happen. Like I'll only talk for an hour and a half instead of 3. You know, that kind of thing. Fear of being judged. Huh? Man, that's a multi-billion-dollar company business versus wrinkles and, you know, what kind of bikinis and all these different things. And every one of us, if we're honest, at some level or some point might somehow look and say, I have a fear of being judged. Fear of loss of freedom. That's getting bigger these days. Fear of change. Fear of change. That's why I barely ever moved. Fear of loneliness. Being alone, especially as we get older. Fear of uncertainty, fear of failure, and the fear of rejection. I would assume that most of us could say one of those things on this list you maybe have dealt with. Maybe some of you are dealing with some of these things right now. There are real fears, but they're internal fears, and here's where they happen, from the double chin up, and usually between the ears. Joyce Myers calls it the battlefield of the mind, deciding to, follow Christ or not. But yet, in all that is the fears of these things that impact us, because how many of us might hold back and not share the word of Christ with someone because we're afraid they'll say, what's wrong with you? Oh, you're one of them? And so we pull back and say, I think I'll pass on that because of some of these internal fears that we have. How many of you know that Satan will jump on the bandwagon and say, I know the push-button fears that you have. And he'll pounce on that button as much as he can. So this whole idea that there are things that can scare us, and I'm not talking about fear like in a going through a haunted house and Frankenstein jumps out and you scream in the dark. I'm talking about the fears that get inside us and cause us to change. They influence us by the factor of fear and the degree of which we are fearful of them. Okay, so you guys are with me? So going on, I want to share, well, before I do that, how many of you know there was a show called Fear Factor? There was a show about Fear Factor because fear is such an impacting factor that they decided that they would take the worst of the worst fears, put them all together in all kinds of tasks and activities, and you would try to win prizes if you could be the best of those. I'm not going to share them because all they were gross. Eating the strangest of things, crawling in tarantula-filled hole, all this stuff. I mean, it was like the worst of the worst. If you could dream up something that might scare someone near to death, that's what Fear Factor was about. Because it was so impacting, and for some reason, a lot of people like to watch someone else in that situation from afar. I'm not signing up for the show, but I don't mind watching you on it. All right, so here's a story that I want to share with you, and I've shared it, I think, long ago, but I want to share it again when it relates to that top 10 list of fears that relate to inadequacy and those sort of things. 6th grade, I was a pretty cool dude. I actually, I'm not bragging, but I mean, I was well liked by my friends. If you had those things that you would do with your fingers, do you like, and my name would come up, or write 3 people that you like and then circle the one you like the most. My name came up a few times, and they even got circled a few times. In other words, I was getting along fine with my friends. Went into 7th grade and they brought all these different schools together, and all of a sudden I wasn't with my friends in the same classroom. You were with strangers. You had to kind of recreate and find out who you were again. The problem was I was moving into 7th grade and the boys in 7th and 8th grade were starting to get muscles. I was staying small and puny. And so I began to develop inadequacies and fears. All this list of fears I began to build mightily in my mind. I got kicked off, what do you call it when they don't keep you on a team? Dropped or, anyone? Cut, yeah, thanks Randy. You had to bring that up. I know, yes. Bob, will you come up and sing that song again, please? We didn't hear the words. I was cut from the basketball team. Me and Michael McDougal, only two of us. They could have left us on, they could have left us sit on the bench, they could have just let us believe we were on the team, but no, we were cut. I was cut off the football team because I was getting too small. My friends were growing and I had stopped growing. I've beat them now, I'm past them now, but I wasn't in those days. And so here's what happened one night. We went to Lyle Sonnenberg's to have a party. Now, it wasn't a bad party, it was Kool-Aid, chips. Back then it was Doritos nacho cheese flavored, right? Yep. And so we were chowing on Doritos and you swallow them sideways and it's like, they go down bad and all those sort of things. And we're drinking Kool-Aid and we're downstairs and he's got music going on and there's guys and girls there, but you know, his folks are home. It's just a minor little party. And so I walk in and I'm, you know, having a great time and being a jokester and different things, and there it is in the corner. His weight set. And for the rest of the night, I dreaded, sooner or later we're going to start lifting weights. Sooner or later I'm going to have to go over there. They're going to say, let's all lift weights. Brian, come here, let's see what you can lift. And man, did fear come over me. Fear of judgment, loneliness, because I'm going to be the goofy guy out. The girls are going to lift more than I am. All these different things came into my head because the guys were growing and they were in football doing all this stuff and I was a puny little stringy-armed guy. And man, all night long, all I thought about was that stupid weight set. And guess what happened? Sooner or later, let's lift weights. And I took off and walked home. Because I didn't want to be seen as inadequate. I didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't want to seem like I fit in. That fear was as real could be for me then. But I have fears now. Anyone have fears yet, if we're honest? Man, that's a struggle that we have. How many of you know that Satan will pile on? That's why I don't allow weight sets here at Cowboy Church. That's why I don't arm wrestle the girls downstairs. But boy, that's one of the most real fears that I've ever had. But I still have other things too. And I'm guessing you guys do too. And so when I look at this list, spiders and all that stuff, yeah, I don't necessarily want a black widow spider on my face in the middle of the night. I don't want that. But the chances are I'm going to deal with that a lot less than I will with those fears that we